Hey everyone, welcome to episode 353 of F-Stop, Collaborate and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. This week on the podcast, I recorded with wildlife and nature photographer Steve Gettle. Steve has been making photographs for over 40 years and has seen a lot of changes in the industry in that time. We sit down and chat about his journey, what makes for a compelling wildlife photograph, and how people can improve their images. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that pre-orders for our newest book, Natural Landscapes, Volume 3, is now available for pre-order. We also have a limited number of copies of Volume 1 and 2 available. These fine art books contain some of the most incredible photography of our time. We have not pulled any stops in producing a high-quality fine art book. Just head over to naturallandscapeawards.com and click on the books link or find a link in today's show notes. Okay, let's get to this week's episode with Steve Gettle. All right, Steve Gettle, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Matt.
Yeah, we finally made it happen.
Yeah, we did.
It took a little rescheduling, but I think it'll be worth it.
We're both busy guys.
No pressure, right?
Right.
Well, for people that aren't familiar with you and your photography, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about who Steve Gettle is?
So Steve Gettle is a nature photographer. I'm from Michigan. I've been here most of my life. My family brought me here when I was a toddler. I grew up on the west side of Michigan in Kalamazoo, and now I'm on the east side of Michigan in a little place called Howell, which is just north of Ann Arbor. And really love Michigan. I love the Four Seasons, the Great Lakes. We've got the North Woods. We got a great place for fall color. Really great macro photography, which is something I really enjoy doing. So I really enjoy shooting in Michigan. So always been a nature guy. I was lucky enough to find my passion for photography just out of high school. So I've actually, can't even believe I'm saying this, I've been doing this for over 40 years now, which is scary. So, but I absolutely love it, and there's nothing else I'd rather do. I do photograph everything. I do macro photography, I do landscapes, I do mammals, I do birds. If I can get myself out in the woods, I can usually find something to photograph. I've made money through photography for probably 35 years of that in all different kinds of ways. I did art shows very seriously in the late 80s and throughout the 90s. I've had an agent for 20 or 30 years. Currently, I'm with Minden Pictures, who's doing a great job for me. I actually owned and operated a gallery for a few years, and currently I run a photo tour and workshop business with my fiance and partner, Nicole, and that's what we do for our full-time job right now. Wow.
So if you had to pick between all of those different ways of monetizing photography, which one was your favorite?
Boy, that's hard. I miss art shows because I miss the interaction with the people. That was really cool. I really enjoyed interacting with people that appreciated nature and bought and collected their work. So I do kind of miss that. The grind of that was hard. There was a lot of travel, but the gypsy lifestyle was kind of cool. All the other artists it was fun that way. Stock, if I could just do one thing, I'd probably do stock. Those were the days, because you could just go out, you could shoot whatever you wanted. You mailed it off, they mailed you checks. That's a great way to go. But you can't, obviously those days are gone. So I love the photo tour business. I love teaching people. I love having people get that aha moment. The first time someone gets a bald eagle in flight, the first time they get that picture, it's so fun to share that with people.
Yeah.
I thought I would have a hard time stepping back from the photography because I'm a pretty aggressive shooter, but I really find the educational part is really cool, and I enjoy that a lot.
I feel like there's a balance to be struck there in terms of showing people that enthusiasm and getting photos so you can show people the process of capturing that image, and then stepping back and helping people capture it themselves. I think there's a useful balance to be struck there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I have a hard time finding photographs without looking through the camera. Like I'm
the same way.
Up into rectangles, the whole, but I have to look through the lens and go, okay, yeah, look what this does to this. So yeah.
Yeah, no.
So we do both. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And then I don't think I've ever talked to anyone else, or maybe one other person who has an agent. What is that about? What is that use? What's the use case for that?
So basically, stock agency, they send out, I send them my pictures, they choose what they want to keep, and then they market it for me and they send checks.
Got it.
So it's awesome, and it's a flywheel kind of thing. It's just self-feeding, and the more images you get in there, the more money you make. And back in the day, that's how people made a living. You had a
Right.
few
A very
agencies.
good living.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, yeah, yeah. It's not like that anymore. Now it's just one of the tentacles of the octopus, right? It's just one of the income streams.
Right. And a
So
much smaller tentacle.
yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah,
Yeah, I know it's funny because a lot of the people who kind of came up in the 80s and 90s with film and doing stock photos, they went on to have photo galleries and things like that. And people were always like, how did you do that? And it's like, I don't think people realized how lucrative stock photography was before
sure.
digital, you know?
Right. Yeah, and that was the only way to build a name for yourself was you had to get published, you had to have book projects, that was the way. That was the way. There wasn't social media. Now you can build a following a lot quicker, but back then you had to work. It was a big long grind.
Yeah,
And
yeah, but it had like a more tangible endpoint, whereas now it's like you can build a massive following and still not monetize anything.
no, absolutely. Yeah, and a lot of those guys that were making really really good money in stock when the bottom fell out, that was their retirement plan. They were like, okay, I've got, this many images and these many galleries. They make X amount per year. And now all of a sudden X is like B, right? Yeah,
Right.
it's a whole different formula. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll probably talk a little bit more about that as we get through this conversation. But I wanted to kind of just dive into a real meaty topic. So, as photographers, I feel like we're kind of all on a journey to find our unique photographic voice.
Right.
What's your journey been like?
So it's been awesome. Just doing what I love for so long has been really good. I think most of us start off the same way, right? We start off with a point and shoot camera or a phone or a small DSLR and start dividing the world up into little rectangles, right? And what I call taking pictures or taking snapshots, just framing up a pretty part of the world and pushing a button and taking a picture. And then we decide, okay, you know what? I want to have more control over this. I want to be able to change lenses. I want to be able to control the depth of field and the shutter speed and all of that. So then we get into, in my case, it was a entry level DSLR or a entry level film camera and start doing that. And then usually we flounder about with different genres. Like I was always a nature guy, so I always knew I was going to do nature. But some people, they go off into street photography or portraits or, whatever it is. And then you find your passion, you find your love, and you start working on that. And then you start looking around, you're like, oh my gosh, look at these guys. They do the same stuff that I like to do. And you start emulating some of those other photographers. And it's I think a lot of photographers don't talk about, looking at other people's work and things like that. But that's a huge part of the learning process. My whole life, I've always looked at photographs and I've always said, do I like this photograph or do I not like it? And if I don't like it, what don't I like about it? What would I do differently if I was in that situation? And that's part of the learning process. And in trying to emulate somebody else's photograph, boy, I like the way he controlled that background. I'm going to try to do that. I like the way he used that light. That's all part of the learning process. And I think, I love looking at like the work of European photographers. They handle light and color so much differently than we do. And
It's true. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and it's really cool. And you can take, like I take things that portrait photographers do and apply it to macro photography and things like that. So it's been a fun journey.
Yeah. And where do you, or how do you differentiate between emulation and inspiration? Because for me, it's real easy to cross over into that emulation category, and then it's no longer your voice. You're using someone else's voice to prop yourself up. And
Right.
I find in landscape that's especially problematic. I know that it's a tired topic, but I see relatively big name photographers doing it pretty often, where they will kind of, for lack of a better term, stalk lesser known photographers because
Right.
maybe they know an area really well, and then they'll follow that person, and then they'll go and copy that exact image and add it to their portfolio, whereas like you're kind of stealing that person's voice. And I'm just
Right.
kind of curious, like, where do you kind of draw that line?
Right. And I think, like for me, it was just part of the journey, right? It was just something I did as a learning tool. Um, it's a very good question because you don't want to copy other people's work, but it's okay to learn from it. And I think in landscape photography, it's a little harder to find unique places, and that temptation is always there to steal somebody else's location. And there's only so many locations in the world, and
Right.
so it's hard to, like, how many times can you photograph Snake River or Mesa Arch, or does the world need other photographs of that? Of course not. But those are iconic locations because they're awesome and they should be in your portfolio. But it's hard to try to find your own spin to put on it. And that's my goal, is to always try to, there's 100 million photographs of cardinals. I try to do something a little different with a cardinal, right? And it's always trying to put your own stamp on it and make it yours. But that's the
Yeah,
challenge of it, right?
it is. Yeah, and in landscape, I feel like there's a lot of people who are very location dependent and condition dependent, and I think that's what drives a lot of what we see in terms of replication. Where if your photography depends on very certain conditions at very specific locations, it's hard to put your own voice on that type of approach to photography because it's all been done before, right?
Sure.
It's
Right.
and maybe that's satisfying for someone. But what I find satisfying is when I can go to a place I've never been to before, and I've never seen someone else take an image of that particular scene before, and I'm able to put my interpretation and my viewpoint into that particular composition and make it kind of my own image, and
Right.
I and that takes a lot more. Uh, I'm not going to say it's risky, right?
Sure.
There's a lot more failure to that
Right.
approach, and
Right.
I'm sure there's a lot of that in wildlife too. And I'd be curious for you to talk about what the parallels are between wildlife and landscape when it comes to putting your own spin on an image.
Sure. Yeah. And I think, one of the things is taking a deeper dive into a location. One of the things I
Yeah,
always tell people is photograph around your own home, because you can be there when the light's perfect. You can be there when you get a dusting of snow. You can be there when that clump of flowers is in their absolute peak. You can know that place intimately, and you can take a deeper dive than someone who might just breeze through the place, right? So
yeah,
there's a lot to be said for that. As far as, you know, there are photographic cliches in every genre of photography, right? A cheetah racing across the plains, a male lion standing looking right at those things are all photographic cliches, and you're not ever gonna, it's hard to make an image that a lot of people haven't made before, and that's one of the challenges now. Of course, is there's over 3 billion images uploaded to the internet every single day. three
right.
billion with a B.
Yeah, yeah,
Every day. That's crazy, right? But I try to do things like I do a lot of stuff with high speed flash, where I'm shooting flying squirrels and gliding between trees, and high speed photography of birds in flight and things like that, and trying to do things that people aren't doing. But that's harder and harder. All these other photographers are pushing the bar up so far and so fast. It's hard to keep up. So,
it
but that's
is.
the challenge. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I don't photograph a ton of wildlife, or at least I haven't in the past. And now that I'm doing workshops with Muge, I go to destinations where there are wildlife opportunities, and we're expected to be able to teach people not only how to capture wildlife, but also how to photograph wildlife in an interesting way, right? Like not just kind of like
Right.
that postcard image. Um, and so I've been kind of thinking about my approach to wildlife photography in the same way that I would try to convince people to do landscape photography, which is to, you know, do my own spin on it. And for me, my approach to wildlife now is to always look for metaphors. Like, okay, there's a penguin, and penguins are cool looking and all that, but how do I photograph that penguin and do it in a way that maybe presents the image in a metaphorical sense? So, for example, like maybe there's this blowing snow and the penguin's walking up this steep snowdrift, and how do you photograph that in light conditions that make it feel like it tells more of a story about the place, or about harsh conditions or survival, or whatever the metaphorical story is. So that's something I'm always looking for.
Right, and that's the fun thing about wildlife. It's a lot easier to tell a story about an animal, about survival, about mating, about courtship, about whatever it is with an animal. It's a lot easier to do that than it is to do with a rock formation out in the desert, right? So yeah. So that's often something I'm looking for too.
Yeah, cool. What are your thoughts on accelerating the process of finding our photographic voice? What are some things that you think people can do to make that come to them a little bit more quickly?
You're probably not going to like this, but there really is no way to accelerate it. It's just it's time, right? I mean, you just got to put in the hours. I think the Malcolm Gladwell book, the 10,000 hours, right? Everybody who's really proficient at something has invested. The one thing they all had in common is they've invested that 10,000 hours. And photography is no different. You got to put in the time. If you work harder and shoot more, you're going to get there quicker, but you still got to put in that time with the gear and put in that time in the field. And, as a landscape photographer, those magic conditions that make for an unbelievable landscape, a really incredible landscape, they don't happen but maybe 4 or 5 times a year, right? They don't happen that often. It's hard to really get that magic to happen. Same thing with wildlife photography. Those really cool encounters, they don't happen that often. The more time you're out there, the luckier you're going to get. But it takes time to build a body of work. And when you say your unique style, your unique vision, I think you're kind of talking about style, right?
A little bit, yeah.
And your style comes from your habits, the techniques that you do, the go-to habits that you have for handling a certain situation. For me, I kind of think my style is clean, simple, hopefully elegant images. And that's developed over many, many years, and it's just the way I tend to handle things. I get rid of visual distractions, and I clean up. I get nice clean backgrounds, and I work for that, and I look for that, and that's become my style. And one of the best compliments I can ever get is when somebody says to me, "Oh, you know what, Steve, I saw that picture and I knew instantly it was yours." Right? That's the best compliment you can ever get, because that means that you've developed that style. But it takes time, and I think people want to rush to get there, and you get there, but you got to put in the hours, you got to put in the work. And
no, I was having a conversation with another landscape photographer recently, and they have all of these really amazing ideas for how to monetize photography,
right?
But their portfolio is like, they have like 10 images, or there's not that many. Yeah. And it's like, I feel like, and maybe I'm just biased or jaded or whatever, but I feel like there's like kind of an order that makes sense to this craft. Like, if you put in the time, like you're saying, and you can develop your vision and your voice, and you start to develop kind of that unique style that people know you for, and you have a body of work that supports, people being able to say, okay, this guy or gal or whatever, they seem to know what they're doing. I feel like you gotta develop that portfolio of images before you start to go down the road of monetization. I find so many photographers are eager to jump down that path of monetization before. If I'm just going to be completely frank, I just don't think they're ready yet.
Completely agree. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. No, and I totally get it. I was the same way. When I first started, I'm like, oh, this is fun. This is awesome. I want to make a living doing this. I want to do this for a job. But the reality is, it's a grind. It's hard. You got to build a following. You got to build a name. You got to build a portfolio. You got to put all that stuff into motion before you can go out and start running. And I think Social media has certainly changed that. Like back in the day, in the film days, you had to get published in calendars and do some book projects and do all that before anyone even knew you existed, right? Now with social media, that supercharged that, right? You can go out and you can build a following and you can build a name for yourself. And, there's guys that are really great at putting together a YouTube video on how to do something. But, like you say, if you look at their portfolio, they're like, wow, they haven't really been shooting that long. They don't really have a body of work yet, right? But they can build that following and then they can market how-to videos, processing videos, ebooks, whoever knew.
Man, I'm glad you said this because one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was social media and how it's a double-edged sword, because one thing that's exciting and frustrating for me from my perspective, and I've kind of gotten lucky myself with this fact, is that social media is almost like a shortcut for some people, because it's like the great democratizer, like if
Right.
enough people, if someone has a huge YouTube following, it doesn't really matter that the photography is not that good. You know what I mean?
Well, they're not selling the photography; they're selling the YouTube.
Yeah, and I mean,
Right.
same thing with me. Like I I wouldn't say lucky, but I worked my ass off to produce a
right.
podcast for 6-7 years, and I built a name for myself based on the podcast, and then my photography kind of caught up later. But I think that's a good example of how having a social media presence can kind of, like, I don't know, shortcut the process a little bit.
It can certainly shortcut the process of building a following. Can it shortcut the
Right.
process of being a better photographer? I don't know. And in some ways, I mean, you're a good photographer, obviously, but in some ways, I think social media feeds the ego without helping you to have the growth. And sometimes growth comes from painful, when I first started taking pictures, I had been taking pictures for probably 3 or 4 years. I had professional gear. I had very good gear. I was out there working all the time. And all my friends and family told me, Steve, you're an amazing photographer. It's just
You're the best.
unbelievable. You're the best ever. And I went in and I joined this camera club of very good photographers. And I went in there and I thought, oh, I'm going to show these guys I'm a good photographer. And I had the biggest serving of humble pie ever, because you think you know, but you don't really know until you start, and social media is very much like that, right? You get likes, you get nice comments, the general public is feeding you all these things that reinforce this thought that you've got talent. And yeah, I'm sure you do at some point, but when it comes down to being a great photographer and having all the technical stuff down, you may, the general public doesn't understand or see that as much as real photographers do. And it can build
Right.
you a false sense of security.
Well, not only that, but I mean, we're talking about images on a phone screen on Instagram, that have been heavily
Yeah.
cropped, or, the resolution is tiny, so it hides a lot of the errors and mistakes that we would normally see on a bigger screen.
Right. Oh,
And-
absolutely.
And then, who's making images popular on Instagram? It's not other photographers, right? It's the public, who, like, they see something that's big and flashy and bright and shiny, and they're going to think it's incredible, and like the rest of us
Right.
are looking at it like, that looks terrible.
Right.
So
Yeah.
but it's interesting that there's a huge gap between what the public finds good and what experienced photographers find good, and I've always had a hard time understanding why that gap is so large.
Yeah. Yeah. It is interesting. I think, it's on the public's. From the public's perception, it's naive. They don't know. They don't know what they don't know. Photographers, we tend to look at things more technical, and that should be sharp, or that hotspot's really distracting, or we drill into the technical, and the public is more emotional, right? They just, this touches them, this moves them. They can look past those technical flaws, and that's who's to say they're wrong and we're right, right?
Right. No, I mean, but it's funny because I look at some of the photographs that I've had become quote unquote successful on social media, and it's some of my worst images, and it's I look back to like 2012, 2013. I was posting some really terrible stuff, and people
Right.
loved it, and like
Yeah.
it's just wild to look back on that kind
Right.
of stuff and like try to understand why is it that this photography connected with so many people and I hate it,
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's always hard to look back on your work. It's always because you've grown and you've gone so far, and yeah, you're almost embarrassed by it now, right? Yeah. No, that's
Oh,
not
for sure.
uncommon. Yeah. 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 I look at
Yeah.
some of the prints that my parents have in their house. I'm like, oh my God, could you please take that down?
I will give
Yeah.
you new prints for free.
Yeah.
Just
Exactly.
can you please put these away?
Yeah. Yeah. This one's over. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that whole ego boost thing is important to touch on because I know that I fell into that trap with social media that, I really liked getting lots of likes and comments and shares on my images. And I think just last week I had an image that had more likes and shares and comments than I've ever had on a photograph in my life. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. I wasn't that
Yeah.
excited about it, it just
Well, it
didn't.
is cool, and it's designed to suck you into that, right?
Right.
It's designed to give you that dopamine hit every time, and it's designed to do that, and it's good at what it does, and it is validating. I mean, look, to have someone look at your image and take the time out of their busy schedule to make a comment and to make a thoughtful comment on it, you've moved them, you've touched them in some way, and that's validating. So there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that doesn't necessarily equate to being a great photographer, like some people think it does.
Right. Well,
You know.
I think the big problem that we've reached is that because of the powerful democratization of social media has now become the tastemaker of what's become quote unquote good in photography.
Sure.
And it's really transformed the landscape in terms of what people come to expect out of images that they see online.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. If it's not hyper processed photograph on steroids, it doesn't even turn people's heads, doesn't even slow them down in their feed.
Right. And that's that whole problem has been motivating for me to try to figure out ways to like move it in a different direction. Like I purposely unfollow people on social media if it's stuff that's too in your face that way. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like to me, it's like if it's popular on social media, it's probably not for me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think as we grow as photographers, I think our tastes change a little bit too. We're looking for we're more attracted to the more subtle things. We don't need that flash to turn our heads.
Right. No, it's true. All right. Well, I know we've touched on this a little bit, but you've been at this for, you said 35 years now. Let's talk honestly about what it actually takes to make a living today in 2023, 2024 as a nature photographer. How has this changed over the years, and where do you think it's going?
Well, yeah, I mean, like you say, we have touched on it. I think it has made a major shift since digital. Like back when I was coming up, it was stock photography, books, things like that, and then art shows. Back in the 80s and 90s, my goodness, art shows were so lucrative. You could do 20 shows a year and make a very good living.
Mm.
Since digital has come out, everybody's a photographer. Everybody knows photographers, and they get work from other photographers, and art shows have become a lot harder to make a living at. It can still be done, but it's not anywhere near what it used to be.
Yeah, and what I found interesting about art shows is that, at the risk of sounding like a jerk here, but I found that the people that are the most successful at art shows, once again, are not necessarily the people producing high quality work.
Sure, yeah. I'm sure that's probably true. I haven't been to an art show in a while, but yeah, there were when I was doing it, there were some very talented people out making a good living. But I think you're selling to the public, and the public are going to have different values and scales than we're going to have. So
Right.
it's probably
Yeah.
not surprising.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about what typically does well at an art show versus what we think should do well at an art show, right?
Sure. Yeah. 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 And I was selling, art shows, it's a hard thing. Like when I did art shows, I was doing wildlife. So I was selling wolves and cardinals and loons and things like that. And
Yeah.
it was, it was an easier sell because people realize if I want a picture of a wolf, I better buy this picture of a wolf from Steve because I'm never going to get a picture of a wolf. And the guys that were selling landscapes that were doing well were selling big, giant, 40 by 60 inch prints that people realize that they're not going to ever be able to make themselves. So if they want it, they got to buy it from this guy. And the guys that were doing the intimate landscapes and the garden flowers and things like that, that was always a tough sell because people had the perception that they could do that themselves, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but nowadays, with the explosion of photography and nature photography, the real way to make money is through education, right? Through doing photo tours and workshops and ebooks, and there's so many different avenues now to educate people. People are doing post-processing presets and processing tutorials and all of that stuff. But I think, to our point that we were talking earlier, in order to monetize that, you still need enough of a following that you can have an audience to sell it to and to market it to,
Right.
and that goes back to that putting the time in. If you want to do an ebook and you don't have a big enough following to make any money off the ebook, it's probably going to be a waste of your time. So you still need to build that portfolio. You still need to build that following in order to get that. But that has also become easier through social media. So I think it's easier in a lot of ways to do it today than it was back then. But it's harder because there's just so many more of us trying to make a dime off of it. And I think, in making money off of photography, it's a pyramid. Right? There's a lot of people at the base of the pyramid making a little bit of money, and to get up to the top where you can make enough to live on, it's a lot harder. It's more rarefied air to get up there. So
yeah, and it's funny because the top of the pyramid, I feel like most people are like, oh, that means they're making millions of dollars. It's like, no, I'm just able to put food on the table.
Right. Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah. And I think too, like, for me, my photography has been a huge passion. I mean, other than my family, my priority is after my family has always been my photography. And I have built my life around my photography. When I was first getting started, I started a small tile company. And I had guys in the field that were setting the tile, and I was running the office, and I was doing the estimating and the bidding. And the whole reason I did that was because I was my own boss. I could set my schedule. I could go out if it was nice in the morning, I could go out and shoot. If I wanted to do an art show, I could take, Friday off and go do an art show as long as I got the work done to keep the guys working, so I had my own schedule. And I think that's, especially when you have a young family, you got to feed the family. You got to get the kids through school. You got, there's a lot of expenses, and you got to make sure you can do that. And then the whole time of doing that, you're building a name, you're building a portfolio, you're building a following, and then slowly you can work into full time. But it's a hard thing to just jump right into.
Yeah, and I feel like nowadays you have to have so many other skill sets. I mean, being a good photographer is like not really that important. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Like you have to be a decent photographer, but you also need to be like, especially if you're doing education, you need to have a decent personality. You have to have people skills.
Sure.
That gets rid of half the nature of photographers because they're like, I hate people.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And then you've got to have marketing skills, and you have to have writing skills, and you have to have business acumen. I mean, there's so many different layers.
Absolutely. Yeah, and again, you got to be an octopus. You got to, have the stock photography. You got to have workshops. You got to have books. You got, there's all these different things that you have to be. And most of the most successful photographers I know are the best marketers I know. Right? Marketing is a huge part of it. And most of us, it took me a long time to be able to say, hey, look at me. Look at, I mean, that's, we're generally, like you pointed out, generally introverts, and we don't want to shout from the mountaintops, look at us. And
Right.
you have to do that. You have to toot your own horn sometimes to get noticed. And
Yeah.
that's just,
Kills me when the people with the loudest voice often have some of the worst photography, or they're some of my least favorite personalities in the business. It's
yeah,
like,
no, that's, yeah.
it's like, yeah, we hear you, and we'd wish you could turn it down a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that was, I think now, because Nicole is a really, my partner, my fiance, is a really good salesperson. She's got a nice way of, and I think now if I could have had her, because when I did art shows, I didn't sell anything. I never sold anything to anybody. If you want it, buy it. I don't
Right,
want
I'm
to sell
good.
it to you. No, I don't want to get my hands all dirty selling it. But Nicole would, oh my God, no one would walk out of the booth without a picture of Nicole. Was
Like,
there.
you have to buy
So-
something before you leave.
yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she's very, very aggressive that way. Not aggressive, but she has a good demeanor for doing that.
Yeah.
So
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the workshops thing, because I saw a relatively, I would say bombastic is maybe the word I would use. There was a claim. I saw he did a reel, and he said basically, in his opinion, of course without any supporting evidence, that's why I wanted to ask
Right.
you about it, that workshops are dying, and that within the next 5 to 10 years there will be no more workshops, and people have to find another way to make money. And I'm just curious, do you see workshops going away that quickly, or do you think they're slowing down, or what are your thoughts on all that?
So there's two different things there. There's workshops and there's photo tours, right? And those,
Right.
for us, those are two distinctly different things. A workshop is a learning intensive, usually a smaller trip to like the Smoky Mountains or Bosque del Apache or something like that, where we're going to just see and solve photographic problems, right? And it's just a learning, it's a beginner and entry level type thing. Not necessarily entry level, but like Bosque, if you want to learn how to do flight photography, we'll take you to Bosque and you're going to go away
Yeah.
being a great flight photographer.
Cranes are a little
then-
slower.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we start off with cranes and we end up with widgeons. So yeah, that's the way it goes. And then there's photo tours. Photo tours are big, epic adventures to Borneo or Madagascar or Costa Rica, and it's more about making sure you're in the right spot to get great images. And I think there's always going to be a market for both. Once again, everybody's getting into the business. Everybody wants to monetize their photography. The equipment's expensive, the travel's expensive. We want to find a way to pay for it. So it gets harder and harder if you don't have a name to draw those people in to do that. Our tours are doing really good. Knock on wood. We're very lucky. There was I'm concerned to see what happens over the next couple of years, because there was some pent up demand after the pandemic, obviously, and things sold
Right.
out really quick. Like we're sold out through 24, I think, and we're just getting ready to release our 25 schedule. So we'll see how that goes. But
Yeah.
I don't see any signs of it slowing down. But there are a lot more people getting into it, and we do more photo tours than we do workshops. So
Yeah, and I think the problematic variable that people need to start thinking about is that there's a demographic shift, right? So like right now you have all of these boomers who have a lot of money.
sure,
Just being honest, if
Right.
you look at the numbers, boomers have like they're like 20% of the population, but they have like 80% of the wealth or something like that.
wow,
Something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure the numbers aren't quite that. I mean, but I've heard that it's pretty
sure,
disparate in that way. And so as those people get older and older and older and are no longer able to go on these trips, the generation Gen X, which is me and probably you, they're not as equipped with the money
Exactly.
as they were. And I'm just curious how that's going to change the landscape in terms of who's able and willing to do these trips.
Sure, and that's absolutely. I mean, like, our business is all 60, 70, even 80-year-olds.
Exactly.
That's because those are the people that have the time and the money. If you're
Exactly.
in your 40s and
Yep.
50s, you're still working. You still got your nose on the grindstone. You don't have the time and the money. You might take one trip a year, but you're not going to take three like some of these people. So,
Right.
and I think the way people learn has changed, right? Like your generation and certainly
Right.
the generations after you, they don't go to camera clubs. They don't do any. That's kind of laughable. They learn on YouTube. They learn on tutorials. Things like that. They don't even buy books. A lot of if you
Right.
want to learn something, you pull up a YouTube video.
Yeah, and in some ways that's problematic because you can put a lot of trust into really bad information.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, but I
mean,
think. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I know we're gonna talk about this eventually, but that was what was so good about camera clubs is that people could get honest critique from
Sure.
people in person, where they're gonna be brutally honest about your images. Whereas nowadays, you post it on social media, you get all these likes and comments, and people are like, "That's incredible," and there's no space for actually getting the types of critiques that are needed in order for you to improve.
Well, and I think that's probably nice. Right? That's probably not a bad thing. We don't want to encourage honest critiques on an Instagram post. That could get ugly real fast.
Oh, I don't mind it. Bring it.
Well, put it in a message, right? Do it in a message,
Right.
not on a comment. But yeah, but I do think there's a shifting demographic there, and it'll be interesting to see. And I think, the other thing about, to go back to the photo tours versus workshop things, you can self-teach yourself how to do birds in flight. You can self-teach yourself so many things. But if you want to go to Africa and put together a good safari, you're not going to know the people. You're better off to go with a tour because we're going to make sure that you're in the right place at the right time with the right vehicles. All of those logistics are all handled.
Right.
Same thing with going to Borneo or any big trip like that. So I think, that's a little different too. And I think that will always be that way, right? Because
Right.
just the logistics of putting together trips like that, as you know from your experience with things like that, it's a lot of work to put those things together.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
I mean, the devil's in the details, and I think
Right.
as I think about this problem, I try to think about, what do people what do they need from photography education that maybe they don't know yet? And what I find is that when people do trips with us, a lot of times we're teaching them stuff that they never even thought about before in terms of what's possible or how to think, composition, like
Sure.
so many people do workshops and they're like, well, I'm just going to get you to the place and like, I'm going to show you the shot.
Right.
But like, isn't the point of education to help people become better so that when they go out on their own, they can take good photos without your help? You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
Yeah. And certainly, like during a photo tour, we're going to do things like night walks and macro photography and things that people don't ever do. So we're going to
Right.
be teaching them all of those techniques too. And then, if I'm shooting alongside people, I say, hey, you know what, guys, turn go make sure you do this vertical or zoom out and get that tree in there too, or, give them all of those tips too, and just get people thinking differently.
right.
So, but there's
Well,
nothing like, as I'm sure you're aware, being able to go to a location and have just a totally immersive experience in a place and your photography and, coming away with just some epic images. That's just such a treat that not a lot of us get to do, right?
Yeah, I was going to say early on in this podcast, I famously made comments about I didn't think workshops were all that useful. And now that I've done a few, and I can see, with the right amount of education and the right approach, you can really see tremendous improvement in people's photography and their approach to making images in a much shorter amount of time.
Sure.
So I think they do have value.
Yeah, and I think again it's that total immersive thing, and
Exactly,
having
yeah.
the time to, most people go out there weekend warriors, or they go out and they spend a couple days here and there, and they shoot for a while. Then they put their camera in, and they may not shoot for another 2 weeks, But when you're in a place for 10 days, you're gonna evolve, Especially
Yep.
if you have somebody chattering in your ear all the time. So
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things I love about our workshops is that we spend a lot of time doing image critiques and where we're helping
Right.
people, become better, but as more of like a masterclass type format where people can share their images, and then as the instructors, we're critiquing things or talking about things we would do to improve the image, and then other people in the room are also saying like, oh, like, have you thought about this, or have you tried this? And so it's like a really great learning experience where people can, get a lot of value out of seeing everyone else's images critiqued. And along those lines, I'm curious, why do you feel constructive criticism is so important in this craft?
Well, back to my earlier example, when I walked into that camera club thinking I was a god of photography, right? You don't know what you don't know, right? Until you start getting that constructive criticism. And it can be painful if you're not up for it, or if it's not done well. Giving someone a critique is an art, right? You have to
Agree.
find the good. You have to compliment the things they do right, and then just pick out one or two things. Maybe you might want to try this, maybe you might want to do that. But until we know that hot spot in the back of the bird portrait is going to be the first thing people zoom in on, and not the bird, we don't know to avoid that. We don't know to get that out of our picture. So, it's just such an important learning tool to make better, stronger images. And it's like what you do and what we do is you get a whole bunch of different opinions, and they're not all right, they're not all wrong, they're all just different, right?
Right.
I'm going to shoot something completely different than the way you're going to shoot it, and that's awesome, that's fine, that's as it should be. But getting those other thoughts helps you to grow as a photographer, and to see things that you may not have seen in the past. And that's one of the things that I feel is sad about social media, is you don't get that feedback. And it's one of the things I see sad, that like camera clubs are dying. Like camera clubs were a great place to get that. That was like the farm system for photography, right? You would get, and you would get these critiques, and you would grow as a photographer. You'd be able to talk equipment, you'd be able to talk location, you'd get friends to go out and travel with. It was, but that's slowly fading away with this next generation, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think camera clubs have a lot of potential, but every time I've gone to one, I've been like, this is just not for me.
Right. Yeah. No.
Like, there's no one here that's my age.
Well, that's the biggest problem is that they're just a bunch of older photographers now, right? Yeah, and there's no young. You gotta have people of all the different generations in there, and some of them like we during the pandemic we did Zoom presentations for camera clubs for like hundreds. That's what we did during the pandemic. We did Zoom presentations for camera clubs all over the world, and some of them were really dynamic, and some of them not so much. So you gotta stick your toe in a few to find one that's good. But it's getting harder and harder because they are kind of fading away. And after the pandemic, they just haven't come back.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Just real quick, I think we should all strive to find a mentor, someone who can help us and guide us and give us that critical feedback and help us to grow as photographers. Because unless you hear the negative stuff, or and you can take it or leave it, but you got to be exposed to other people's ideas about your images in order to grow. Because we get tunnel vision. We're like, oh God, I know how hard I worked to get that picture. It's got to be awesome, but so that's important.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important, and I think if you're gonna do that, you need to open yourself up to some vulnerability, and really just, don't take it personally if someone says, I think this photograph is terrible,
Yeah. You gotta allow that. And I'll have people on our trips that'll say, boy, that's great, Steve. Did you think about doing this? I'm like, oh man, doggone it, I missed it. And we all do that.
Totally. Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, it's funny because I can look at other people's photographs all day long and find things that I would do differently. But if it's my photograph, I have a much, much harder time doing that.
Sure, because you, in your head, you've thought of all the variables, right? You've been through that process. You were standing there. You made the best picture you could possibly make, but maybe not, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, it's funny. I mean, I feel like even the best photographers in the world, they bounce their images off other people before they release them, because you're gonna miss stuff that you like you said, you have tunnel vision. You think your work is amazing when it might have some issues with that you missed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I want to talk to you about travel. I know you do a lot of traveling as a wildlife photographer. Obviously, you're toting around these ginormous lenses. What's it like for you? Like, how do you pull that off?
So, well, it's not, it used to be, and Nicole and I still shoot with like big 600 f4s, but most of our clients, it's changed so much. You can, like a trip to Africa, you can take a 150 to 600 to 70 to 200 and a 24 to 70, and you're good. You got a little tiny camera bag. It's not such a big thing, but, getting the gear there is one thing. Generally, we try to carry on all the glass, right? We put that in our carry-ons. We put everything we need when we hit the ground is in our carry-ons. Our cameras, our battery chargers, our computers, our cards, our cable releases, our hard drives. We carry all that stuff on. We use a big roller bag, and then we use a shoulder bag I think it's the Think Tank Visions bag, and we can put lenses and all our computer stuff. That all comes on the plane with us. It never leaves our sight. Then, shorter lenses, tripods, heads, some flash equipment. Some of that stuff we'll check, and we're fine with that. If we're going to, Costa Rica or Ecuador, we bring a six flash light system for doing high speed flash of hummingbirds that we have people shoot on, and that is in a Pelican case in the belly of the plane. But the key thing is to carry on the important stuff and to check the other stuff. When we get it where we need to go, we can usually buy a tripod if we need to, if it doesn't show up or something like that. And then just, over the course of years, learning what to bring, because what you're going to bring to Africa is going to be something totally different than what you're going to bring to Borneo. Because Africa, you're working out of a safari vehicle, you're shooting off a beanbag. In Borneo, you're going to do a little walking around. You're going to do more night photography, more macro photography. So, getting the equipment list for the different destinations is kind of tricky.
Yeah, and then conveying that to your clients in terms of, because what I find is a lot of times people are like, well, I really want to bring this, and this on this trip. And it's like, trust me, you're not going to use that.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes that can be hard.
Yeah. And we send out a pretty comprehensive trip book for every trip, telling people about what to expect with voltages.
We do too.
Season. Yeah, no, exactly.
People still question it though.
No, they absolutely do. And if someone really wants to bring something, I'm like, yeah, that's fine.
Knock yourself out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're welcome to bring it. I don't think you'll use it, but yeah.
Yeah. What I find though, sometimes it's like, please don't bring that, because you're just gonna be slower now.
Right. Yeah.
You're gonna slow the whole group down because you've got 200 pounds worth of gear that you're not gonna use on your back.
Right. Yeah. And most of our trips, we're not doing, I think with landscapes, you guys are doing a lot more walking than we're doing. We've got bigger lenses, and we don't hike far. I don't even bring, I killed myself with a big old backpack for a long time. I don't even bring a backpack anymore. I'm a roller bag guy now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So.
Man, roller bags, like, whenever I see someone bring a roller bag on a trip, I'm like, nope, you're not going to make it too far with that.
Well, but then you bring, I carry things on my tripod, and we have rapid straps, double rapid straps, and we figure it out. But yeah, I have a terrible back because of my backpack for 30 years. So I'm a roller bag guy now.
That's funny. Yeah, no, I can't do the roller bag. Imagine walking like 4 miles in a sand dune with a roller bag.
I imagine walking 4 miles anywhere. Yeah. I'm trying to think if I've ever walked. No, yeah, we're not big. You're a big hiker. Yeah. Didn't you just do a big walk across the mountains?
Yeah, 500 miles. Yeah.
You walked 500 miles?
Yep.
Oh my God. Yeah. No, I'm a flatlander. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
but landscapes, that's what you got to do. You got to get those different perspectives.
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I wanted to ask you a couple more questions. One of the things you told me about that I thought was really interesting. So you've apparently turned your property where you live into this massive nature photography paradise, and I would love for you to tell us what that's like. What did you do?
So that was our other. So when the pandemic hit, Nicole and I's world travel business pretty much shut down. So we had 2 years of doing Zoom presentations. And then we had just moved into a house. We found a really cool house. It's 10 acres, backs up to state land. It's awesome. But the guy who lived here was very utilitarian. So the yard area was a big giant gravel turnaround and a bunch of gravel out to the barn. It was just a big gravel nightmare. So we got rid of all that gravel. We trucked in a bunch of topsoil, and we put in probably an 8 or 10,000 acre wildflower meadow. And
wow.
Not acre. Did I say acre? Square foot.
You did.
8 or 10,000 square foot. I do that all the time. Wildflower meadow. And Nicole, who is a wonderful naturalist, she went through all of the guidebooks, figured out what butterflies we could possibly get in our yard, figured out what their caterpillars eat, and figured out what they like to nectar on, and that's what we planted.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's just, and it's awesome. It just, the flowers change every year, and then we put in, we dug a big pond, a wildlife pond, and we put in blinds. I've got a reflection pool blind where there's a 12-foot long reflection pool, and then a blind sunk into the ground, so you're right at water level, and we get birds and chipmunks, and yeah, it's super cool.
Well, that sounds amazing.
Unfortunately, we're never home now, but when we are home, it's awesome. And then, like the yard, and it just continues to pay dividends. We got bird feeders. Like when we first got here, we're next to a state park, so there was a lot of wildlife. But with all the feeding that we do and all the habitat that we built, it just pays dividends whenever we're home. I went out one time, I guess it was last August, and found 25 species of butterflies in my yard.
Wow.
Which is just crazy. And it's all because we built this habitat, right?
Yeah.
So,
Are you finding that you're able to make portfolio worthy images just right there in your backyard?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It feeds my stock photography, when we're home. And it's nice to just be able to step out. And again, that goes to what we were talking about earlier. Developing your area, understanding your area. So many of our clients, they just show up and they only photograph when they're on a trip with us. And it makes me so sad because you've got all this stuff near your home that, you know when those birds nest, where this fox den is, you need to take advantage of that stuff and work those skills. The more you use your camera, Nicole and I are so lucky because we have our cameras in our hands, probably 200, 250 days a year. We instinctively know how to, the more you use it, the more of an extension of you it becomes, right? So
totally.
If you're not shooting at home, it's not going to sink in like that. But but that investment of time has paid so many dividends photographically.
No, that's amazing. I'm super jealous. I don't have enough space to be able to pull that off, but we do have an okay sized backyard, and I have deer constantly visiting my house and birds. I mean, we have, what do we have? 1, 2, 3. I have like 5 bird feeders, and then I have like one of those. I have this giant pole that's in my backyard for some reason. Like this, I don't know. It's like 15 feet tall. Right. It's wooden. So at the top of it, I put one of those cages for suet.
Oh yeah.
And then I have like downy woodpeckers and all kinds of woodpeckers that come to my house all the time, which is pretty fun.
So now if you want to photograph that, what you do, take that cage off of that ugly pole, put it on a pretty log, put it on a pretty stick, and then you photograph the birds on their way up to the right, and then you can photograph them on a nice log instead of a pole.
Right. Yeah,
right?
no, I totally.
So, but that's the way we've set up our yard, and we've got feeders with, and I'll put, I put a perch up that I want the bird to land on next to the feeder, and then he sits on that perch, and then he drops down to the feeder, and
Yeah, that's smart.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right, Steve. Well, I have one more topic for you. And I saved this one for the end in case people who don't like this topic, they can just turn it off now. Because we have covered this topic a lot on the show, and I have gotten feedback from people that they're tired of it. But I know it's something that you're excited to talk about, and it's something I'm still excited to talk about. And it's our favorite topic, digital manipulation in nature photography. What are your thoughts on it?
Oh my God, we're going to beat that sad, poor, tired, dead horse.
We are, man.
Well, that was a hell of a segue. I'm super excited. I think I'm just going to sign off right now.
I mean,
So-
it's funny because I have so many people that are like, yeah, I stopped listening to your podcast because that's all you talk about. I'm like,
What's
is it though?
Oh my
Come
gosh,
on.
it isn't. I listen to a lot of your podcasts, Matt, because they're very entertaining, and I have only heard a couple of them, but they always
Yeah, I
get
don't
my dander
know.
up.
If it's, I feel like if it's something you're sensitive about, then whenever it comes up, you're like angry about it or whatever. I don't know.
Right. Well, I will.
And-
I will just put my 2 cents into the space, and we'll see what happens. So, it's really very easy. I believe in the golden rule of digital manipulation, and that is, if your process isn't exactly the same as mine, you're cheating.
Yeah, that probably went really well with the audience, Steve.
Yeah. All right. So.
That was
Look,
a joke, by the way.
That was a joke. That was absolutely a joke. All right, so I'm not the photo police. I don't want to be the photo police. It's your name that goes on your work, and that's all good. So, and I guarantee you, I'm more of a purist than pretty much anybody out there. So I got into photography because I like to photograph. I like to be out in nature. I like to see the wild places and wild animals of our world, and I want to spend time with them. And I want to spend time in the field making images. I don't want to spend time behind the computer. Post-processing is a nightmare to me. I don't even know how to make a layer. So that's where I'm coming from. So, but my concern, and one of the things, and the only reason I wanted to talk about this, because I don't know that I have heard someone talk about it from this perspective on your podcast. And my concern is, how does the public view photography with this in mind? And from my career of doing art shows for 20 years, I talked to tens of thousands of people who collect photography all over the country for all that time. And I can tell you, one of the things that they loved most about photography is the perceived honesty of the medium. That not only was this photographer lucky enough to witness this spectacular sunrise or this spectacular situation, but they had the skill to record it on film or to create a picture of it. And my concern is, and I heard someone say, I think it was on your podcast, that the public understands that they understand that this is just what photography is. It's all manipulated. Everybody does whatever they want to things. And I wanted to just push back on that, because from my perspective, that's not what they see. Their perception of photography is what they do with a cell phone, right? They point it at a subject, they push a button, boom, they got it. They can change the color a little bit, whatever. And that's what the public perception of photography is. And my concern is that if we're not honest about our process, that we're gonna lose that trust, right? And I look at someone who would come home from an art show with a big 40 by 60 inch print, and they would put it up over their couch, and they would, they'd have their friends and family over, and the guy would go, that sky was not that sky wasn't there when he took that picture, and that mountain is not that tall. He stretched that mountain. And how disappointed they're going to feel, and how, they're going to feel like they can't trust photography anymore, right? And that's my concern.
Yeah, well, I think it's a valid concern. Devil's advocate, I've had lots and lots of conversations with people about this, and I think there's a lot of photographers out there that say, as long as it moves somebody, or if somebody looks at something and it moves them emotionally, they don't care that it doesn't represent what was actually captured in the field. So I think you're right, though. I feel like that honesty piece is important, because I agree with you that the majority of people, when they look at a photograph, they assume that at least somewhat represents what that person experienced, right? I mean, I think that's what makes photography so magical for people, is that it's like, wow, you captured that moment at that precise time in those conditions, and you made it look amazing. That's special. And I think that's what people find special about photography as an artistic medium.
Right.
Otherwise, they would like paintings, right? Like you can
Right.
create a painting, and that's a totally different process. But a photograph represents a moment.
Right.
You know?
Exactly. Right. And
And I
I
think-
and I agree 100% that there is a certain percentage of the public that don't care. They like that image. They would want to hang it. But for the people that don't feel that way, they give them the information to make an informed decision. Don't send them home with something that they may feel they've been deceived by, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
how
I
do you
mean-
do that, and where do you draw the line? And yeah, I
Right.
know that this brings up a bazillion more questions, but like
Well-
when I go ahead.
I was just gonna say my view on this has become pretty nuanced over the years. I mean, I totally appreciate some of the artwork that gets created through photo montage and
Absolutely.
compositing. I mean, there's some
Mind-blowing.
amazing
Yeah,
people who create some incredible stuff that, it's art.
right.
It's really
Oh,
beautiful.
It's all art.
But I think where I draw the line is that for me it's about intent. And a lot of the photo montage work that I see that I like a lot, it's not trying to represent nature, right?
Right.
It's trying to be a very otherworldly creation,
Right.
and it's doing it very successfully. I think when people are using composite to create an image that is trying to convince somebody that that was a real thing when it's not, that's, to me, like, that implies an intent to deceive the viewer.
Exactly.
And usually that intent is for commercial gain or social media success or commercial success, or maybe they're trying to sell a workshop. And to me, that disingenuous intent is where I get really wrapped around the axle. I get really upset because
Right.
for me, it's almost like a used car salesman who has a car in the car lot that's got a V6 in it. And by the way, one of the cylinders in the V6 doesn't even work anymore. Like, the spark plugs are bad. And then they're putting it on their website saying they have this amazing V8 for sale.
Right.
And then they try to sell it to you as a V8 that works. To me, that's kind of the same type of behavior. That's what I
Right.
equate it to anyway, for me anyway.
Yeah, and I think it's like when I post on social, and I'm just actually doing Facebook now because that's where my market is.
Yeah, yeah.
So I just do Facebook, but when I post on Facebook, I post the image. I post if it was in controlled conditions because I do a lot of wildlife, and if I do a rehabilitated animal, I don't want people to think it was something wild and free. That's being
important.
honest. Yeah, and I even go as far if I do a digital manipulation, which I very rarely do, but once in a while, like I've added canvas to something because it was too close to the edge, and I call that out. I put a DM and I say, here's what I did, and if I crop something because I'm selling experiences and I don't want to show a picture of a full frame lion that was cropped 85%, and so I put what lens it was, and if I cropped it 10 or 15%, I let people know. And I think that's just being honest with people and letting them know so they can make an informed decision about what's going on. And I don't think it's
Yeah.
that hard to do.
Right, that's the thing I've always pushed back on is it's not hard to be honest, right?
Right.
It's it takes another 2 minutes of work to like add something to your caption or your description, and people choose not to.
Right, yeah.
Why is that? You
Yeah.
know?
Well, and with AI coming, holy cow, what's going to happen now?
Right. Well, it's interesting because it's been interesting to see a lot of the people who are super into that type of style of photography have now jumped into AI, and then they're doing the same thing with AI. They're presenting it to the audience as if it's a photograph.
Wow. Yeah.
They know it's not a photograph, but the audience doesn't know it's not a photograph,
Sure.
and they say nothing about it not being a photograph. It's fascinating to me to see people, intentionally deceive their audience in a
Yeah.
way that's for personal gain. Like, I just don't
And
get
then
it.
do you sign that?
I know.
Well,
like,
you did.
how do you even take credit for something like that?
Well, you came up with the prompts. Is that what they call it? Prompts, yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, let's not lose all your audience. we're going to go far
I know.
down a rabbit hole.
All right, Steve. Who do you recommend for the podcast? Who are a couple of photographers we need to know more about?
So I think two guys, and probably everyone in your audience knows them, but I think they would relate to your audience because they are guys who do wildlife, and I like to see you do more wildlife photographers. And these are guys
I hear you.
that do wildlife as what I call animalscapes. And actually, I think animalscapes are one of the hardest genres to do because not only do you have to have a beautiful landscape, you have to have an animal in there as well. And the two guys I would recommend would be Tom Mangelson and Marcel Van Oosten, both of whom have books that they've just come out with. So I'm sure they would love to come here and talk about their books as well.
You would be surprised.
Yeah. Well, they're both probably pretty busy.
Right. Yeah. For sure. Well, Steve, I'm glad we could get through this without. I mean, there's probably like at least 2 people who decided to listen to the whole thing. So.
My mom and my sister.
Right. No, I appreciate it, Steve. This has been a lot of fun. And then for Patreon, for the bonus episode, for the people who support the podcast at patreon.com/fstopandlisten, we're going to do a fun little bonus episode with you and your partner about what it's like running a photography business with your partner, and the gloves are going to come off, I feel like.
No, it's all love and happiness here. Rainbows and unicorns.
We're going to find out. All right, Steve,
I'm sure we
cool.
will. All right. Thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you to Steve for the fun chat today on today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please do check out our fun and lighthearted bonus episode where Steve and his partner Nicole discuss the ins and outs of running a photography business with your spouse. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.